Hi, I'm Emily Moat, TSU 4-H agent here in Warren County. In my first installment of Can My Animals Eat That?, we're going to be looking at a few plants that are poisonous to both goats and sheep. Now, some of these plants may not be present in your animal's environment, but it's always good to know what they look like, so if they appear in the future, you can easily identify them. Today, we're going to learn how to identify each plant based off of distinguishing traits, learn parts of each plant that are poisonous and time of year they pose a threat, and learn symptoms of poisoning from each plant. I'm not going to discuss the specifics of how to treat poisoning from these plants. If you do suspect your goats or sheep have been poisoned, contact your veterinarian immediately. Toxicity may vary due to an animal's age, size, condition, quantity of the plant they consumed, part of the plant that they consumed, and the season that they consumed it during. The very first plant that we are going to discuss is the chokecherry. It is a shrub that can be found along streams here in Tennessee. It has small leaves with teeth-like protrusions along the edges and produces a small fruit that can range in color from dark red to purple, like I have pictured there on the left of the screen. Chokecherry is easily confused with the wild black cherry, which we'll discuss on our next slide. The toxic principle of the chokecherry is hydrocyanic acid, or prussic acid. Prussic acid is commonly found in the wilted leaves of fallen trees, the bark, and twigs. Ruminants are the animals most commonly affected, but chokecherry can be toxic to monogastric animals as well. Poisoning can occur during the spring, summer, and fall of the year. Symptoms include difficulty breathing, bloat, and anxious expression, moaning and staggering, recumbency, and convulsions before death. Another symptom might be that the mucous membranes and blood of the animal both turn bright red in color. Animals may show signs as early as 15 minutes to 30 minutes after ingesting parts of the plant containing cyanide, and may die within 1 hour of consuming plants if left untreated. Our next poisonous plant, like I mentioned earlier, is the wild black cherry. This is a medium-sized tree that can be found growing in fence rows, open woods, and pastures. It has smooth, dark-colored bark, and when flowering, the tree will produce small white flowers that eventually turn into very small, black, shiny fruit, like I have pictured there on the left of the screen. The toxic principle of wild black cherry is prussic acid, and it can be found in the wilted leaves of fallen trees, in the bark, and twigs. Ruminants are the animals most commonly affected, but prussic acid poisoning from wild black cherry can also be toxic to monogastric animals. Poisoning occurs during the spring, summer, and fall of the year. Symptoms include difficulty breathing, bloat, an anxious expression, moaning and staggering, recumbency or lying down, and convulsions before death. You may also see the mucous membranes and blood turn bright red in color. Animals may show signs of poisoning 15 to 30 minutes after ingesting plants containing cyanide and may die within 1 hour of consuming plants. Now, you probably noticed that the toxic principle and the symptoms of poisoning from both the black cherry and the chokecherry are the same. That's because these plants come from the same genus of cherry tree, and they are easily confused, like I stated earlier. The best way to tell the difference between a chokecherry and the wild black cherry is to take a look at the leaves. Your wild black cherry is going to have more elliptical or elongated shaped leaves, whereas your chokecherry is going to have more rounder, bigger leaves. Also look at the size of the fruit. The fruit from your chokecherry is going to be a little bit larger than fruit from wild black cherry. The next poisonous plant is the milkweed. Milkweed is not only poisonous to goats and sheep, but also cattle. It is commonly found in fields, along roadsides and fence rows, in open woods and pastures. Different species of milkweed can either grow upwards or spread out. but they all produce a milky white sap when either the stems or roots are disturbed. That's the easiest way to determine if it's milkweed, is to break the stem and see if that milky white sap appears. Milkweed typically produces white flowers, but they can range in color from red, orange, lavender, or pale green. It also produces a really unique looking fruit pod, like I have pictured there in the top of the screen. It is an elongated, round shaped pod that may have little hair-like protrusions sticking off of it. The species of milkweed will determine the toxic that is present in your goats and sheep environment. Those toxins that may be present, depending on the species, are resinoids, alkaloids, and glycosides. All parts of the milkweed plant are toxic, and it doesn't matter if the plant is eaten green or dried. Eating milkweed in the amount of 2% of body weight can cause symptoms. Animals are not going to naturally seek milkweed out. This is not a plant that they flock to. This is not a desirable plant for them. The only time we tend to see animals eating milkweed is if they've been forced to due to lack of other desirable forages available. So making sure that your goats and sheep have access to plenty of desirable forage will lessen the chance of poisoning from milkweed. Also, making sure it's not in their environment will do that as well. Symptoms of poisoning include staggering and depression, weakness, labored breathing, and dilated pupils. Animals will also go down and exhibit technic spasms before going into a coma and dying if left untreated. Our next plant is the poisonous hemlock. This plant can easily be identified by the unique coloration on the stem. The stems of poison hemlock are easily identifiable because they're going to have purple spots or streaks, like I have pictured in the photo here on the left of the screen. Poison hemlock is often confused with spotted water hemlock, which is not as prevalent in our area. The toxic principle of poison hemlock is a group of nicotine-like alkaloids. The stems, leaves, and mature fruit of the poison hemlock plant are all toxic. The leaves are more dangerous in the springtime, and the fruit is the most dangerous in the fall. Symptoms of poisoning from this plant include nervousness, trembling and staggering, slow heartbeat, dilation of the pupils, increased salivation, initial stimulation or excitement followed by depression, a musty or mousy odor to the breath and in the urine, prolapse of the third eyelid, which can lead to temporary blindness, and eventually death by respiratory failure. Symptoms occur in minutes to a few hours after eating the plant. Death can occur as soon as 15 minutes and up to 8 hours after ingesting. This is one of the plants, or the most toxic plant that I am going to cover today. Our next plant is horse nettle. This is a thorny herb with flowers ranging in color from white to purple. They produce a green fruit that eventually turns yellow as it matures and resembles a small tomato. And I have two different examples of what that fruit looks like. In the left of the screen, you're going to see on that horse nettle plant, very small green cylinder-shaped fruit. That is in the early stages of growth. And then in the top right of my screen, you'll see those mature fruit that have turned that yellow color and look like small yellow cherry tomatoes. Horse nettle is common in pastures and old fields. The toxic agent of this plant is the alkaloid solanine. Toxicity is going to depend on the plant's maturity when eaten, environment, and parts of the plant that are eaten. The berries are the most toxic part and are at the highest of potential toxicity when ingested when they are mature and yellow. So even though the berries are most toxic when they are yellow, they still contain those toxic principles when they are green. So eating the berry at any stage can be harmful, but when they're ingested at that mature yellow stage is when they're at their highest toxicity. The leaves are also toxic, but to a lesser degree. Animals can suffer from two different types of poisoning from horse nettle. They can have acute or chronic poisoning. Symptoms of acute poisoning include irritation of the mouth and GI lesions. Symptoms of chronic poisoning include unthriftiness, jaundiced mucous membranes, so their mucous membranes, like their gums, around their eyes, they're going to start turning that yellow color. Abdominal dropsy, or their stomach just becomes distended, and constipation. You can see these symptoms if left untreated. Now, we all probably are very familiar with this next plant, the buttercup. If you have driven around Warren County anytime recently, you've probably passed fields full of these tiny yellow flowers. And even though they make a really pretty field, they're still considered poisonous to our goats and sheep. Buttercup is easily identifiable by their small, bright, vibrant, pretty yellow 5-petaled flowers. Buttercups contain an irritant called protonomin, and the oil isn't highly toxic, but is present in various species of buttercups in differing amounts. So even though this plant isn't seen as a highly toxic one, it's still one that we want to remove from our animal's environment. The flowering plant contains more toxin than the young plant, and the toxin is found in the stem and leaves. Buttercup is distasteful to all livestock, so it's not a plant that your goats and sheep are naturally going to want to consume. We see them consuming buttercup when access to desirable forages is very limited. Symptoms of poisoning from buttercup include abdominal pain, severe diarrhea, convulsions, and if left untreated and large amounts are consumed, it can potentially lead to death. Milk from affected goats and cows will be bitter and may have a reddish color. The last poisonous plant we're going to discuss today is oleander. Now, oleander is commonly found in the landscaping around homes, but can make its way into your animal's environment by way of landscaping clippings that have been tossed into their pasture pen. Oleander is an ornamental shrub with small, showy flowers that can be white, red, yellow, or pink in color. The toxic principle in this plant are two different glycosides, oleanderside and neroside, and they can be found in all parts of the plant. Oleander is not just poisonous to goats and sheep, but is also poisonous to cattle. Symptoms of poisoning from oleander include gastroenteritis, diarrhea, abdominal pain, sweating, and weakness. Cardiac irregularities are another symptom. This can be characterized as an increased heart rate, and in the end stages of poisoning, as a slower heart rate. Those are all the poisonous plants that I'm going to cover for goats and sheep. If you have any questions regarding any 4-H related activities, you can give my office a call at area code 931-473-8484 or shoot me an email at emote@utk.edu.